And now we're going to move to the last theoretical contribution. And before I ask the next presenter, I would like to remind you about possibility to comment and to evaluate the presentations, and now you should start be able to navigate in our application and fill in the evaluation, all of you that are connected to this conference. So please evaluate this conference before you go for lunch. So now I would like to welcome Mr. Michal Opatrný. Mr. Opatrný is the head of the Department of Ethics, Psychology and Charity Work, and he's a Vice Dean for Science and Development at the Theological Faculty of the South Bohemian University in České Budějovice. His contribution is called Social Work, pulled out of its foundation, and it's about social work and pandemic. So the floor is yours.
So good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So I'm really pleased to hear information from Dr. Janabova, what I heard at the end. So maybe I will just build on it at the end of my paper. And I have to say that due to my technical troubles, I didn't hear at the end of her paper. Well, I was thinking about the topic that we should prepare for this conference. Last year, we have prepared a topic for the last year conference of the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs to enrich it by the pandemic-related issues. So, in fact, I have just extended my paper focusing on so-called cultural wars. What we have done in pre-COVID period, nothing serious was threatening us, but the pandemic, in fact, showed us important issues, what Jarka, Mrs. Janabova disclosed, and maybe it will be reflected in the future of our social work. Year ago, more than a year ago, when we focused on social work, the major media claims were how Turkish policemen are sending the refugees to break into the European Union territory, fighting against the Greek policemen. So the Greek policemen shoot at them, preventing them to enter the European territory. So it was the topic that we focused on more than a year ago. But then, thanks to the pandemic, it's no longer in the focus of our attention. And once the pandemic is over, we will see what will be the media focus in the Czech social work. Those topics that were discussed at least within discussions of specialists during conferences, and we have heard Professor Chytil from Ostrava in the University magazine, which is the magazine journal of universities. They dedicated part of the discussion to social work, and they explained something that we could have witnessed and what we can summarize into two basic developments. First of all, social work is reduced at one hand to provisioning of services and allowances, social services and allowances, and at the same time, in 2018-19, we just heard the notion of cultural wars. We were quite surprised by them because certain human rights were questioned then, and Radka Janabová highlighted some of it. The first development Professor Chytil was also describing in the interview. It was described for a long time in the Czech Republic, quite soon, once the new Act on Social Services came in force. In fact, the helping organization focusing or providing social work started to reduce their work to provisioning of social services, and in a certain interpretation, social work equals to provisioning of social services. Somewhere social work fits into the social services, and somewhere services fits into social work. And those who criticized the development claimed that services represents a part of social work, but it's not the entire social work. So social work exceeding social services was no longer supported, and nobody paid attention to it. Professor Musil highlighted this situation in 2010. Already Radka Janabová had described the situation later on in 2015, for instance. So with the outbreak of the pandemic, 2019, everything that Radka Janabová, for instance, explained on the example of her client, in fact, this trend, in fact, was strengthened. In fact, what happened? Social work reduced to services and allowances, social benefits, become a standard solution. Everything started to be resolved by providing certain support, giving a moratorium, ban, imposing a moratorium on something, hoping that one day the situation will be terminated, and nobody focused on resolving the issues of the citizens, and in fact nobody pays attention to those issues at national level. For instance, resolving issues of people such as the client of Radka Janabová, would it be resolved by paying cash to them or providing them service they have to fit into in a certain way? Would it be enough? So then, even though the pandemic is not under control successfully here in the Czech Republic, or it's not handled at all, so everything is handled by kind of moratorium or temporary allowances or something like that. So the bridging assistance of those bridging temporary tools become a standard, and in fact those people depending on the assistance will get used to it, and in fact the assistance is not efficient or will not reach those in need, and then people resolve it by the decisions described by Radka Janabová. So it's impossible to resolve everything by services and allowances. So the second trend, which is maybe hidden a little bit now, about vaccination, its improvement and distribution, it's the ideological deconstruction of human rights. Human rights are valid for all human beings, irrespective of citizenships, irrespective of sex, irrespective of color of the skin, and so on. So this deconstruction that was initiated was based on the reduction of the inherent human rights. In fact, it was about dehumanization of refugees. stating that refugees are not equal humans like we, citizens of the European Union, and that's why they don't belong here. So they are animals for somebody, so they should not be here in the European Union. So, in fact, somebody claimed that they don't want refugees because they are not sufficiently civilized or sufficiently human. This deconstruction is deeply rooted here. For instance, Jack Rupnik in 2019 described a really nice article describing that in the Czech Republic there is an alliance between liberal economy and liberal democracy. The feeling of freedom in the 1990s, everybody felt freedom simply happened, and now we will all develop. But then it was manifested that this model was terminated, maybe by the death of Václav Havel or maybe by other reason. It lasted several years, certain time only, and those who claimed they are in favor of liberal economy disclosed that their understanding of democracy is rather authoritarian. So kind of authoritarian, oligarchy-like democracy. Only those having friends, having certain property, owning certain maverick. And then suddenly people were outside of the signal. For instance, persons at risk of domestic violence. Nobody paid attention to them in a way. Nobody pays attention to them now, not considering what the quarantine lockdown measures would bring to person at risk of domestic violence. For instance, in spring, when the strict quarantine was ordered. So we started to work with people with mental disorders, mental health issues. So in fact, nobody worked with that group of clients with mental disorders that were stressed. And also children from socially disadvantaged environment. They didn't have internet, they did not have computers, and nobody was thinking about those clients, and nobody paid attention to their situation. Other clients were isolated, irrespective of their mental health, irrespective of their rights. So they were rather clients of the residential services, residential social services. So again, human rights were questioned. So, in fact, quite not good approach of the state. In fact, was in line with the view that residential services clients are legally incapacitated, so they should be locked. Nobody should enter the facility, and their rights were not considered at all. Only basic needs were considered. So both target groups that were forgotten totally, and we forgot about their rights and about their needs. So topic of the rights, a topic that human beings have rights of self-determination, and this right to self-determination was not considered. So the deconstruction and lack of consideration of those rights was questioned and broken, in fact. So you can look at this joke that was distributed in spring in social media. at a bar you see red and bad, and different pandemics are meeting them. Cholera is missing there, and coronavirus, as a millennial generation says that coronavirus does not want to kill, but wants to destroy the society by collapsing, causing a collapse of public health system. And we know now that those two trends are summarized now, and in fact, not only health system, but many more services are collapsing. Education and social systems are also collapsing. So, in fact, social work is shaken. When we say something is wrong, then we also assume something is right. So two sides of one coin. Of course, when we criticize something, we should assume that there are some good situations, bringing good solutions to situation. So, and with respect to the theme of today's conference, I may conclude that social work as such itself should seek arguments in favor of good and bad practice, because it's about clients. So when we see what is wrong, we should ask a question, how we can solve it. Radka Janabova said that the good advices to clients won't help much. I agree with that. And there was a question how ethics is taught at our colleges and universities. Yeah, it's part of the standard, but the trouble probably is that the ethics is not interlinked with the subjects on social policy. In fact, the ethics is quite often considered to be private matters of social workers when they deal with clients, dealing with families and so on, and probably it's not sufficiently related to the fair structure of a society and the entire social feeling in a society. What may be needed in the multidisciplinary team and interdisciplinary team, we need to be able to argue right, which is also part of the ethics, how to justify that our solution we propose is the best and good. So maybe for the future, what seems to be maybe appropriate solution is the humanity scientific understanding of social work. Social work is a social science, of course, focusing on social functioning, but from the view of justifying our mission in the society and functioning of clients, we need to be able to explain well and being able to argue well. And this is a humanity science. It may be explained by this paper, which is quite simple. It's Sylvia Kolastony, German professor of social work, and it explains that social work is perceived at three levels. At the bottom, we see the techniques, how to work with clients. So it's explained by social sciences like psychology or sociology, social science. So to explain how client lives and why it fails, why client is in stress and so on. So then we see our decision making in the upper level, what our decision making, what is good and what is bad. Once we are confronted with the situation of a client, we just ask ourselves what is good and best solution. But in the International Code of Ethics or Czech Code of Ethics of Social Work, we define values of social work. In fact, we all have our own values, values of the organization we work for. So our own perception, what is good and what is bad. So we are influenced by this perception how we then look at the overall perception of human work. So here we can see social work think in several levels. May think how to work with a client. He needs to get some explanation, but needs to get an explanation what is good and what is wrong. Then thinking about it, then maybe the pressure of empiric experience and own decision making, what is good and bad, may not be that stressy. It's good to look at things with perspective, to think about the approach. What approach of social work should be undertaken in order to be able to distinguish what is right and what is bad in practice. What is good and what is needed is a change in a structure of a society, which in fact were described earlier, when society may reduce social work only to the social work and services and the trend of deconstruction of human rights. So if we wish to change this thinking, changing the structure, we need a kind of revolution, rebellions, but we also need and may work with a grassroots approach, civic societies, which is not supported by the social services, social work. So at the end, I just brought this picture. So I just made this picture at the Basel Cathedral. This is the Saint Martin without a bakery, a merciful structure of a society. So this statue, in fact, shows that the bakery was removed. Instead of that, we only see the tree stump there, part of the tree. So that's how it was perceived not only in Switzerland but in the entire society. And part of that should have been fair structures in the society. Once having fair structures in the society, then beggars will no longer be needed and may not exist, but still those merciful ones willing to share are still needed. So you can see that Saint Martin is willing to share his own code. And then beggars will not be needed and will not exist and will not be seen, in fact. And I think this is quite important for social work. So, in fact, this is the effort how to change social structures and change the social feelings in order to avoid deconstruction of a society, reducing social work to social services and social allowances only. We, from the academic field, focusing on that thinking, maybe we can change it. We can focus more on the research of the clients and not thinking about what is and what is not a social work, setting up the identity. So instead of that, maybe socialists, sociologists conduct the researches focusing only on the macroeconomic levels, maybe, and maybe we can also contribute to the shift of thinking, highlighting the importance of micro levels also, and this may also benefit the communities and the entire society. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I have handled everything in time. I see the presentation only, but no longer at the time. So thank you very much, PhD Opatrný, for really nice paper and for invitation to multidisciplinary and the research. Me being sociology expert, I really confirm that it is necessary to interlink the experience from the practice. And then I have one comment here that in fact setting of social work in a formal view limits in a way or forms how social work looks like. Then maybe you can just comment it. We still have a few minutes. Thank you very much. Well, formal setting of social work is rather a formal setting of system of social services. And in fact, here, thanks to transformation process, quite often it happened that organizations providing social services were managed by managers that did not study social work. In fact, for a long time, everybody with a humanity education could have work in those positions, which has been changed then later on, but still management of the organizations did not study social work, and for instance the contributory organizations or in fact NGOs missions were a charity, but in a negative sense. Nowadays, it's changing. So I think that for the future, this is a question for the management of the organizations. Looking to services they provide through the eyes of social work, then you may see that the service covers only part of it. The formal setting and social work as profession is much wider. And I guess there is no time to explain it. Of course, there are different interpretations what is social work as profession. One interpretation says that social work itself should define the scope of activities. So that's why those organizations should be managed by those who studied social work. And from the management point of view, you should simply arrange everything together, even those items not covered by the social services budgets. But I think nowadays, since new generation of the social workers come to labor market, and hopefully the first who studied the new philosophy are getting to the age when they can work at a managerial position. So I hope that it will be changed. It's necessary to highlight, of course, if the formal setting of social services work is changed, then it will benefit also the social policy of the state when the organization will not depend on the regions and their priorities, and sometimes only social care services are supported while the social prevention services are not supported. Thank you very much for your comment. So I think that we are talking not only about social work, but we are living in quite vivid period, fluid period. So let's hope in better futures. Let's hope that we will take the lessons from the pandemic development. Thank you very much. Mr. Opatrný, thank you, everybody, all participants, all panelists.